Well, good evening, everybody, and God bless you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real thrill to speak the word and to have you wonderful people that are here that want to listen to it, and all the people that will be listening it down the road to check out the YouTube recordings and the like. So tonight we're going to get into Genesis 18. You can turn to that if you'd like. But last week we covered Genesis 16 and 17, and we learned about Sarah and Hagar and who Hagar is, and that she was an Egyptian, and that Ishmael was Abraham's first son that was born through Hagar, the slave woman, who was a servant of Sarah's. And we learned about his future descendants, that there would be 12 major sons that would be very much involved with the population of the Arab nations. We learned about the sign of the covenant that all males were required to take and be a part of that. And we also got some name changes. Abram went to Abraham, and Sarai went to Sarai. And then we learned also about the blessings on Ishmael as well, on his descendants. Tonight, we're going to talk about in Genesis 18, we're going to look at Abraham and his three visitors. And they are very interesting visitors. Um, so I'm going to share my screen here. We'll be working out of the REV. And I use that pretty often. And we're going to be working as well as the REV commentary, which is a wonderful aid to understanding so many things. Plus, I'll be sharing a video later on in the evening that I think gives some interesting information about the city of Sodom and its location, etc. So tonight we're back in Genesis 18:1 and the Oaks of Mamre. And everybody, I'm sure, knows where that's at because we've talked about it in a number of occasions. Yahweh appeared to him in Genesis 18:1 by the Oaks of Mamre, and that was in between two cities. Do you remember those two cities? I know you're muted. You probably do. But one was Ai, and the other one was Bethel. And you probably remember the location of these two cities was north of Jerusalem. So that was where Abraham spent a lot of time. That's where he put up the altar for God, and that's where he spent time there at the Oaks of Mamre. And he offered the land that his nephew Lot wanted, and Lot wanted the plains of Jordan, and he started to live near Sodom. And Abram took the higher ground and lived up there in Ai, and that's where he had his flocks, and that's where he spent most of his time. And as you know, he was a tent dweller. He was a sojourner. He had no resting place that was his that he owned, but he moved about, and this was his kind of headquarters. So he's there in Mamre, and this Mamre is the name named after a friend of his. That's where it's not a type of tree or anything like that, but it is a name of one of his friends. And he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. So it's a typical day where he was living. It's hot outside, which is very common in Israel. And he's sitting there at the entrance. And he lifts up his eyes in verse 2. And he lifts up his eyes and looked, and behold, three men standing nearby, not far off, but nearby. And when he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed to the ground. Now, he's an old guy. He's an old man. He's getting to be around, I think, right now, close to 99. But he's so excited, he runs out. And when he sees them, he knows one is God, and he knows there's two other men. So the typical way of showing worship and respect was he would fall to his knees and then bow his upper body and face down to the ground. Now we're going to get into God appearing here, and this is going to amaze us, which he just did. And this is like one of 13 times that God actually comes into concretion of some sort so he can be seen. And each time he does that, he looks like a man. Now, here we don't get a good description of what he looked like, but in other places, he is a man with white hair. and very dynamic with lots of colors and boldness and wonderful, wonderful array of things around him. And so here he is. It's just an awesome thing, and it's hard for us to believe, but there he is. He appears with these two other men. And so in verse 3, and said, this is what Abraham said, Lord, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please do not just pass by your servant, but let a little water be brought. Then wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing to me. But that's what happens. In that particular culture, it was extremely important to show hospitality. And oftentimes, the hospitality reflects your blessings of God. You give in abundance because God has given to you. And before I move on, I don't want to forget to mention some of these 13 times that God did reveal himself as a man. And he did that to Adam and Eve, and then to Abram, and then to Jacob, Moses and the elders of Israel, to Samuel, Solomon twice he appeared to, Micaiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, which was a very, very amazing showing with he's on his chariot throne and comes in from afar with his cherubim, all four of them, and the wings. Read the first chapter of Ezekiel. It's very exciting. Also in the Daniel, he appears to Daniel, Amos, Stephen, which is very familiar to all of us. When Stephen was stoned, he looked up into heaven, and there was God and Jesus standing at his right side. And then in the book of Revelation, he shows himself to the apostle John. So those are 13 records where he actually appears in a human form. But when you read the commentaries, it's kind of interesting. The commentaries you would think would kind of pick up on this, but they don't. Most of the Christian commentaries show theologians don't believe that he appeared in the form of man at all. No. That can't happen. It was the afternoon, and Abraham was taking a siesta because it was hot, and he just dreamed this stuff. Well, the problem, as we'll see in the next few verses, it says that he appeared to him. So that's hard to deny. Because God literally says he's appeared, and some say it was a dream, not real. Others suggest, here's another one, a pre-incarnate Christ showed up there. And that was, or it was an angel claiming it was Yahweh. But all of these, if you study them, they're all very weak arguments. So the nap time in the dream is not, it doesn't really sit. So they assert that since God is invisible, it must have been the pre-incarnate Christ. However, sometimes appears with Christ. Now, there's several records of that. And there's this idea that Yahweh cannot appear in human form, but yet the same people say God can do all things, I guess, except appear in human form. So how does that fit? This is not the case. He does and has done so many times. So let's take a look at some of the things that are kind of a hang up to certain Christians on this particular subject. And we'll turn to John chapter 1 and in verse 17. John 1:17, and the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only begotten Son, who is in a most intimate relationship with the Father, has explained him to us. So he explained him. Now, a very good way to translate this is that no man has known. The seen makes you think, see with your eyes. But people will say in the Bible, God has seen me. And so much of that is they have seen my heart. They have seen me. They know me. God sees me. These words seen and know are switched interchangeably throughout the Bible. So no one has ever known God, the only begotten Son, who is in a most intimate relationship with him. He has explained him. So Jesus did the explaining. So you can see the context. It's not about a visual seeing of God. We're talking about a knowing of God. And Jesus was the one who explained him. So that helps with the people who think that you really can't see God. Now, there's other records that um, we know that's true. And we cannot see God in all of his fullness. Moses wanted to see him, but God only showed him a portion. And I'm sure many of you remember this record in Exodus 33. And the context is Moses is kind of being real comfortable now. And he said, he asked God in verse 6:18 will go up. And he said, please show me your glory. That's what Moses said to God. And God says, I will make all my goodness pass by in front of you and will proclaim the name of Yahweh before you. I will be gracious to you, whom I will be gracious. I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. So Yahweh also said, behold, there is a place by me, and you are a stand on the rock. And it will happen while my glory passes by that I will put you in a cleft of the rock and will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. And then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. So even Moses saw a portion of the glory of God, not the fullness, not everything, because God says you can't do that. And then, but God can come into manifestation as a man when he wants to and show himself. So there's really no really big difficulty in understanding. The natural state of God in all spirit beings is invisible, but angels and even demons can become visible. The Bible plainly states that Yahweh appeared to Abraham and to all those many others. Those 13 times he shows himself. Now let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7. We're going to pick a few verses here. We're going to read 9, 10, and 13 and 14. I watched, now Daniel, this is a vision that Daniel is getting and that talks about the future. This is way back when with Daniel, who got a lot of information. It's a wonderful book to read. I watched until thrones were set in place. Now we're talking about the future, the coming kingdom. Thrones are going to be set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. God is called the Ancient of Days, and what does that communicate? Well, then communicate he's been around a long time. So he is eternal. So he uses the words Ancient of Days to communicate that. And so God, the Ancient of Days, comes in, he takes a seat on the throne. His clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and his wheels were burning. Verse 10, a river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands of thousands minister to him. This is the angelic kingdom. And tens of thousands times 10,000s stood before him. The court was seated and the books were opened. So you get this idea, we're getting into Judgment Day. You get this idea that the angels have showed up for this big event. All the angelic families are here, and the Ancient of Days is in the main throne. He takes his seat. And then let's go down to verse 10. And now let's jump down to 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man coming from the clouds of heaven. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And so the Son of Man means he's often called the Son of Man, which indicates he was born of a human. He was a son of man. He was a son of mankind. He did have a human mother, so he is called the Son of Man. and he was born to a human parent. It's very clear that the Jews believed the Messiah would be a man who would receive special honor from God because they read the book of Daniel. And so it's very clear that Jesus is going to be a man. He's called the Son of Man who has a beginning. He was begotten. And we have the Ancient of Days who was not begotten because he is eternal. And so in verse 14, and to him was given dominion. To who? The Son of Man. Jesus was given dominion and glory and a kingdom so that all the peoples, nations, and languages will serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. In his kingdom will be one that will not be destroyed. So we are looking at a prophecy of a future kingdom. And this we will know as more word and prophecy is given, as this is a millennial kingdom, and Jesus will rule in that kingdom, and they will serve him. So that's a wonderful description here in Daniel. Let's take a look at Revelation chapter 21. And not only is it a wonderful revelation, but these records and others foreshadow God's desire to have a close relationship with us. When he comes down and talks to people like this and actually, as we're going to see, eats a meal, he has a desire to be with us. And even though he may seem distant at times and hasn't shown himself in concretion for a long time, the day is coming when that will change. Revelation 21, verse 3. And I heard a great voice out of the throne saying, look, the tabernacle of God is with man, and he will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. This is what God has wanted ever since the Garden of Eden, and the day is coming. He won't just show up every now and then like he did throughout the Old Testament for people to see. He'll be right next to us. We can look over and say, there he is. And this is going to be a wonderful time. And then you got to read verse 4. And he will wipe away every tear from the eyes, and death will be no more, nor will there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. The former things have passed away. We have a wonderful, wonderful kingdom that we're looking forward to, where God will live us and he'll wipe our tears away, and all the death will be no more. There won't be any mourning or crying or pain. Something that is really wonderful to look forward to us. Back to Genesis 18, verse 3. Okay, so he bowed down to the ground and he said, Lord, if we just talked about, Lord, if now I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. But take a little water. Let water be brought to you and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And this is very interesting. It shows the hospitality that still lives in the East, even within Muslim country, Muslim people. They're very hospitable. No matter if they don't have a lot, they share it with you. If you need a place to stay, you stay with them and they will protect you. And then in verse 5, it's kind of, before I go into verse 5, it's interesting that rest yourselves under the tree. He could have invited them into the tent, because he's got this big tent, but he decides to stay outside and doesn't say why. But, my guess is in the summertime, being under a tree where there's a nice breeze is far nicer than being indoors. And so he stayed outside with them. And he says, I will get a piece of bread. It sounds like, what? A piece? So that you can refresh yourselves, then pass on by. For that is why you are passing. That is why you are passing by your servant. They said, very well, do as you have said. Okay. So he gets the okay from God and the angels. It says they said, very well. They're all in agreement on this. And Abraham hurried to the tent. So he rushes back to the tent and says, quick, 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, make loaves of bread. Okay, How much is 3 measures of fine flour? Well, you can look it up in the footnotes. It's 5 gallons. Okay, so you ladies who've ever made bread, or you men, I've made bread, uh, that's a lot of bread. And so if you're making, they make needed to make loaves. Now these loaves are like pita bread. They still do this over in the East. They have flat bread. They call it flat bread. We have it over here. Pita bread, it's flat. You can open up, stuff it with stuff. And normally, if you're making something like that, a pancake or something like that, it takes like a 1/4 cup of flour. So if that's the case, we're talking over 230 loaves of bread. Now that shows an abundance. And they're not going to be able to eat all that, but that's what they did. They wanted to show God has blessed me so much, I am sharing this with you. So they're really being good to their guests. And since he knew it was God, he wanted to make it extra special and had Sarah to prepare all this 5 gallons of fine flour. So that's a lot of loaves. Actually, it's over 250 loaves, and that's a lot. And anyone who's made bread knows it's not done in 10 minutes, right? It takes time. You got to mix in the yeast, you got to let it rise, you got to punch it down, let it rise again, then you got to throw it in the oven for baking. So we're talking at least a couple hours, right? So here God and the angels are patiently waiting under the tree. They knew it wasn't going to be 5 minutes. Okay, let's look, let's continue on here. Uh, and then Abram ran to the herd and he took a tender and good calf. So this had been a young calf, not full grown, and gave it to his servant and who hurried to prepare it. Now, any of you have lived on a farm, or even if you haven't, if you're going to use some beef, you have to, first of all, you got to kill the animal. You've got to remove the insides. You've got to skin it. You've got to cut it up. And then you got to cook it. So again, we're not talking about 10 minutes. We're talking about a big event. So anyhow, he gets us all together, and let's take a look at in verse 8. And he took curds. Now, curds could be, when I normally think of curds, and maybe some of you do too, my mom, whenever we had milk in the refrigerator and it would start to spoil, she would call it clabber. And it would clabber, it get kind of like almost like yogurt or jello. And then she'd put it in a cheesecloth and drain it. And what would be left were curds. And this would be cottage cheese. You could add some milk to it and you had cottage cheese and you didn't have to throw out the milk. So curds also could have been butter. We're not sure exactly what this is referring to. And then he also brought milk for them to drink and the calf that he prepared. So he's got some beef and of course the bread, and he set it before them and he stood by them under the tree while he ate. So he's standing under this tree and then he has taken on the role of a servant. Now, it kind of reminds me of one of my jobs in the Way Corps way back when. This would have been back in the Way Corps was 3 years then. I think it still is. You had a first year of being in resident, which mine was in New Knoxville at headquarters. Then we had an intern year where we're sent out on the field. I went to San Antonio to do a branch coordination. And then the final year, it came back to, then we had purchased Emporia, the Way College of Emporia. And so we were there. And the 7th Corps was there, which was a huge corps. And the 5th Corps was there, maybe 50 of us or 30 or 40, I don't remember. And so one of the jobs that I had was whenever Dr. Werwell would come to the campus, when he would dine, which would be, he would have lunch with the whole group. Everybody ate together in this huge room. And one of my jobs was to serve him. And so I got to know him pretty well and what he liked and didn't like. And so I enjoyed that very much. And I think Vicki, I was going to bring this up to Vicki tonight, but she's not here. I think she also had that opportunity. So I had an assistant. We'd bring bowls of food, whatever we were having. And it was always family style there at Emporia and in New Knoxville. Bowls of food would be set out. The plates were already be set. And then they would pass it around. And then so I would be standing by. Doctor always had coffee. I knew how to make it. He wanted 1 rounded teaspoon in a Farberware coffee pot of 12 cups. And I made it that way every time before he would teach. If I were getting his ready in the green room before he'd teach, it'd be one rounded teaspoon of Folgers coffee in a Farberware coffee pot. Never wash the pot. Never. You can rinse it out, but don't wash it. You take all the good stuff out, he said. So that's how he liked his coffee. And it was always black. And he only liked half cups because it'd get cold. And he loved saltines and butter on the table. So I'd get the butter out 2 hours before lunch so it would be soft. And so there's the butter, there's the saltines. And so he's sitting down and everybody's eating regular food and he likes to eat saltines and crackers. Sometimes he eats everything else and he oftentimes does. So he'd be buttering up his crackers. And what was worse, he would dip it in his coffee. And then the first time I was about ready to pour a second cup and I looked down and it had all this greasy butter and saltine crumbs in it. So I go to take the cup because I'm going to dump it. And he does this. Okay, now put it back down on the table real quick and just pour coffee over the top of that stuff. That's how he liked it. And another thing he liked was he didn't like to ask for anything. He wanted you just to know. And so I got to learn his expressions and his hand gestures very quickly. So he'd do, you can't see me, he'd do something, he'd be done eating and he'd go like this. And that meant get his plate. So, and we always removed plates from the left, the hand of cursing, because you're taking the old dirty dishes away, but you always served from the right. That's how he liked it. So anyhow, I knew what it was to stand as a servant. I stood and watched him and waited. If he needed more food, I got it. If he needed more coffee, I got it. If he needed more crackers and butter, I got it because he was my focus. And this is what Abraham was doing to God and the angels. He was standing there under the tree, ready to pass any food that they would need, give them water, give them milk, whatever they needed. And that just shows great love and respect for the person you're serving. And each of us would do those kinds of things to each other. If we had the opportunity, I would, if it was that kind of deal, I think we have this joy of service. And it's such a blessing to serve others. I don't know, it's just a wonderful blessing to do that. It was for me. And I consider it a great honor. And I'm sure serving God, my gosh, what kind of honor is that? So Abraham must have just been tickled pink to be able to do that and have so much abundance that God had given him in the first place. So Abraham stood by and made sure that everything was ready to pass and all the cups were full. So let's go back to Genesis 18 again. We'll continue. And in verse 9. So he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Now, we get into Sarah's laughing. We heard about Sarah's laughing. Abraham got a pass on his laughing because I think the added position in his heart was a little bit different. So anyhow, when we got God and the angels, they say, well, where's Sarah, your wife? And he said, here in the tent. And he said, I'll return. Yes, return for you at this. This is God speaking now. I will return. Yes, return. He's emphasizing this, what he's going to do at this time next year. And behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Oh. And then Sarah was listening. She's in the tent. So they must have been in. She's listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him, Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in days, and the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. And that just simply meant she no longer had her monthly cycles. And what we call today, she had passed menopause, which would normally mean you couldn't get pregnant. So this return, this time this year, you can take it literally, okay, it'll be like 365 days from now, but this can be translated return this time, emphasizing to the way of life, the time of life. It can translate it the time of life, according to the time of life, which would be 9 months, right? That's how long it takes for a baby to be born. So, but Abraham and Sarah, they knew they were old, and the way of woman had ceased with Sarah. And then so Sarah, she laughs within herself, not out loud, but she laughs within herself. But her kind of laughing was different. After I am worn out and my Lord is also old, will I have this pleasure? It's kind of almost a mocking or a disbelief. But Yahweh said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? That's a very good question, because God knows who he is. This was astonishing to God. He created the heavens and the earth, so this is no big deal for him. Sarah must have picked up on God's astonishment and became afraid, so she denied it. So, saying, I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh. And but God said right before that, is anything too hard for Yahweh? At the set time, I'll return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. That's getting pretty emphatic, right? He said it twice. And now Sarah is kind of shook up. Oh, I didn't laugh. God's got very good hearing, for she was afraid. She was afraid. And he said, no, indeed, you laughed. And that was the end of it. There was no browbeating or scorning. He just said, is there anything too hard for Yahweh? And what this is really doing when you look at this story is God is really helping her with her unbelief. She was probably struggling with the whole idea, but now God is saying there's nothing too hard for God, and she can't deny that. And he says, I'm going to be here at the time of life, and you're going to have a baby. So that must have just really caused her trust and her faith that this was really going to come past to soar. It had to have, because it did. Now, okay, now we're moving on to Sodom. So God, the meal concluded now. Let's take a look in 16. The men got up from there. So, the meal was done. They ate they ate their bread and everything else that they wanted. And so they looked down towards Sodom. Now, this is interesting. And I'm going to develop this here a little bit soon. They looked down towards Sodom. Well, if you look at the topography, Ai and Bethel, they're up higher in the mountains, and so is Jerusalem. And then in the Jordan Valley, that's where Sodom was. And I'm going to show you where it's located. So as they look down from Ai, it's very believable and doable that you could actually see the city walls of Sodom way off in the distance across the Jordan River, because the plain would be open there. So Sodom was literally at a lower level. And in verse 17, and Yahweh said, now he's talking to his angel, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Now, what I'm about to do means it's going to happen pretty quickly. And since Abraham will become great and a mighty nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed by him. So he decides to tell Abraham what he's going to do, because he has chosen him, so he will command his children in his house after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what is right and just, so that Yahweh can bring on Abraham what he has spoken concerning him. So God looked at it as very important, and so he does it. So let's look at verse 20. And Yahweh said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous. And the grievous can be translated heavy. It's serious. And as we're going to learn, their behaviors are extremely evil. Then I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to reports that have come to me. God delegates authority. He's got somebody reporting to him. And if not, I will know. So he's going to see firsthand. So he's going to see it for sure. And the men turned from there. So they're up here at Ai, and between Ai and Bethel at the Oaks of Mamre. And they turned and they went towards Sodom. So they're going away from them and heading downhill eventually to Sodom, which isn't very far, but Abraham remained standing with or before Yahweh. And then we start to do the questioning here in verse 23. The men turned, in verse 23, and Abraham drew near and said, will you really sweep away the righteousness with the wicked, the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous inside the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Abraham knew that's not going to happen. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do what is right? Abraham's got a wonderful relationship to God. That was pretty gutsy for him to say, but he's a man and he spoke it. And will not the judge of all the earth, who God is, do what is right? And in verse 26, Yahweh answers this question. And if I find 50 righteous inside the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And so he's going to go through this whole process. And Abraham answered, and before I go through this whole process, this is what we're going to see. I want to give you some background here on Sodom, because the two angels, when they turned away, they headed towards Sodom. And that's what I want to give you a view of, so you can get a better idea of what's going to happen here. So I'm going to play this. It's about 8 minutes long, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, and we don't have but a few verses. We're just going to wrap up the chapter 18. So we won't go long, but I think this will be very entertaining and helpful to you. So I'm going to start that now.
During the days of Abraham, the Bible says a cataclysmic event happened. Several cities on a plain were utterly destroyed by fire raining down. Today, we know this story as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. However, for years, archaeologists searched for the cities of the plain with no luck. So many argue the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was a mythic tale that never actually happened in reality. However, new evidence has come to light that suggests the destruction was a real historical event. The biblical location of Sodom and Gomorrah was a matter of debate for years, with mostly everyone agreeing that the cities, if real, would have existed around the Dead Sea. Some propose that the cities should be located at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Possible locations were found, and one site in particular showed signs it was abandoned and exposed to fire. At first it may have looked promising, and some conservative archaeologists have promoted it as a satellite city of Sodom. However, several studies have shown that this site was abandoned around 2350 BC, long before the time period of Abraham, even by very conservative estimates. The surrounding sites also did not seem to end at the same time period, with one coming to an end about 300 years earlier. Thus, the southern sites could not be the cities of the plain. Furthermore, the geographical location of Sodom seems to suggest a more northern location. In Genesis 13, Abraham leaves Egypt and goes into Negeb, and then travels to a place between Bethel and Ai, after which Lot and Abram agree to split up so they don't fight over grazing grounds. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. So what we can see is, Genesis says that Abram and Lot were around Bethel and Ai, and then Lot moved east and settled across the Jordan Valley, close to Sodom. This suggests Sodom was across the Jordan River, at the northern end of the Dead Sea. Genesis 13 also refers to the area as a kicker. Nahum Sarna notes this word means round or oval shaped, which fits the description of the flat plain north of the Dead Sea, where the Jordan River flows through. One can also see extremely far across it, fitting with the description of Lot, being able to see across the whole valley. And the evidence suggests it is a well-watered region, filled with several springs. Later on, the Romans utilized these springs to bring water to various cities via aqueducts. So the plain north of the Dead Sea fits the description of being a well-watered place as Genesis 13 records. Genesis 14 also records the existence of bitumen pits around Sodom, which fits with the northern end of the Dead Sea, as later cultures mined the area for bitumen. Dr. Leon Rittmeyer notes Genesis reference in chapter 14 to the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea, can also fit with the general area, where the armies of Sodom went out to fight the invaders. In the Middle Bronze Age, a northeastern corner of the Dead Sea may have had a widened breach due to fluctuations of the sea level, which can fit with the description of where the Battle of Genesis 14 took place. At times, various areas along the Dead Sea were open land and can fit nicely with a valley being nearby Sodom. Thus, given all this data, the description of Genesis aligns quite well with the northern end of the Dead Sea. Some suggest Sodom must be further south, because Ezekiel 16:46 says it was south of Jerusalem. But the word we translate as south doesn't actually mean that. It literally means to the right of. In fact, in verse 46, the author is speaking of the perspective of the city of Jerusalem, and first mentions how Samaria is north of the city, then mentions Sodom off to the right. If you were in Jerusalem looking north, off to the right would be east, just north of the Dead Sea, which would fit with where Genesis 13 indicates that Sodom is. Going on this information, archaeologist Stephen Collins began looking for Sodom in this area. In working on earlier surveys, he came to a site called Tel El Hammam, which was the largest Middle Bronze Age site in the Jordan Valley. To put it into perspective, Collins says 10 of the city of David would have fit inside Sodom's city walls, with room to spare. Excavations began on the site in 2005. Initially, it was found that the site was suddenly destroyed and abandoned, but the date of the destruction seemed to be too late to match the biblical account, as it fit with a date of around 1600 BC. However, in 2013, new evidence came to light after 8 seasons of excavations and reading over 40,000 separate vessels. The massive destruction and sudden end to the occupation of the site happened right in the Middle Bronze Age too, correlating with the time period of Abraham. Collins notes the date of the destruction has been confirmed repeatedly from carbon dating testing. Also, after the sudden destruction, the area was uninhabited until the Iron Age. What is interesting is the massive site and the surrounding satellite cities seem to have been suddenly destroyed by fire and an extreme amount of heat. Despite centuries of erosion, vast amounts of ash were found in the layer of the Middle Bronze Age that was associated with the end of the occupation. Pottery that melted into glass, melted zircon crystals, mud brick structures blown off their foundations, and scorched foundation stones were all found in this layer, showing there was a massive, fiery, catastrophic event that suddenly ended the occupation of the site. Collins says, "We have pieces of pottery melted into glass, some bubbled like lava, found across the site. We have burned foundation stones and bricks turned red or ceramic-like from extremely hot temperatures. Most of the Middle Bronze Age 2 mud brick superstructures are seemingly blown off their foundations. It is a scene of utmost devastation and disintegration. We have even documented pieces of desert glass, impact glass, strewn across the eastern kicker, created at temperatures exceeding 6,000 degrees Celsius.
I thought that was interesting and informative to give you an idea where Sodom was in relationship to Bethel and Ai. And it also shows it's very doable that Abraham could have seen Sodom when he was standing there with Yahweh at that higher elevation. And then the two angels just headed off. And so we're going to wrap up things here at the end of these last few verses of 18. So I'll go back to Genesis 18 and let me see here. Stop sharing. Let me get that queued up for us. Okay. And there it is. Have to kind of manage this stuff. There we go. Now we're good. Okay, so back into Genesis 18. And so he goes on and will not the judge of the earth, all the earth, do what is right? And Yahweh said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous inside the city, I'll spare the whole place for their sake. And Abram answered and said, behold, now I've taken upon myself to speak to the Lord, though I am but dust and ashes. But if of the 50 righteous, 5 are lacking, will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he says, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And he spoke to him again and said, what if 40 are found there? And he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, oh Lord, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. What if there are 30 found there? And he said, I will not do it if I find 30. And he said, behold, now I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. What if 20 are found there? And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. And he said, oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak just once more. What if 10 are found there? And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And when he had finished speaking with Abraham, Yahweh departed, and Abraham returned to his place. So when you think about the people who came out of Sodom, you've got Lot and his wife, you got his 2 daughters, and their 2 sons. Those are the ones that were going to be removed. And that would be under 10, right? So God said, if there are 10 there, I'll spare it. Well, he didn't spare it because there were under 10. It looks like at the most there were 7. And it ends up that the 2 sons decided they didn't want to go. What kind of man would do that? After we're going to see about what just happened in their house. Why would they want to stay? So next week, we're going to get into what the angels did when they went into Sodom, a very interesting account and a very amazing account. So Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus Christ, thank you for your word. Thank you for your love and the beauty of it, how interesting you are and how you deal with people and how just and right you are. Abraham knew it, and we see it too. So bless this group tonight. Thank you for a wonderful evening, a great night's sleep tonight, that the day tomorrow brings your glory again, your faithfulness and your mercies will prevail once again. So bless this group tonight. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.